Hello and welcome to the Forthright podcast. I'm Sam.
And I'm Anna, and today we're absolutely delighted to have Rosanna Amaka. Hello, Rosanna.
Hello, thank you for having me on your podcast.
Thank you so much for coming on. So, Rosanna is a writer from London and is of African and Caribbean heritage. Her debut novel, The Book of Echoes, was shortlisted for the Authors Club First Novel Award, the RSL Christopher Bland Prize, and the RWA Debut Ground Award. Her second novel, Rose and the Burma Sky, was inspired by a conversation with her grandmother and follows the journey of an African soldier fighting in World War II.
The reading from Rose and the Burma Sky is taken from the audiobook, which Rosanna will introduce after this blurb. A gripping and intimate historical novel of a black soldier's experience in the Second World War, a rare and moving tale of love and sacrifice. One war, one soldier, one enduring love, 1939. In a village in southeast Nigeria, on the brink of the Second World War, young Obi watches from Mango Tree as a colonial army jeep speeds by, filled with soldiers laughing and shouting, their buttons shining in the sun. To Obi, their promise of a smart uniform and regular wages is hard to resist, especially as he has his sweetheart Rose to impress and a family to support. In Rose and the Burma Sky, Rosanna Amaka weaves together the realities of war, the pain of first love, and how following your heart might not always be the best course of action. Its gritty boy's eye view brings a spare and impassioned intensity, charging it with universal resonance and power.
It's from the beginning of the book, chapter 1, and it's Obi, who is based in eastern Nigeria, who's the main narrator, and he's talking about his mother who took part in the Abia women's riots. It's from the audio book, and it's read by Martins Inhangbe, who played Will Mondrick in Bridgerton. I hope you enjoy it.
They say my mother was a fighter, that she swung my little brother high above her head, his maleness dangling between his toddler thighs, swung him high, straight on to her back, then tied her wrapper well, secured him, then the fabric at her bosom before marching off, leading the woman along the dusty road from our village to Oloko. Well, they say the ground shook as she marched, that her feet pounded the red earth, the dust gusting up in a thick cloud around her feet. They say that the tremors could be felt for miles around, that she woke villages as she and the women passed by, that their voices could be heard as far south as Calabar, ringing out loud, demanding to be heard. And some women from those villages they passed stopped in mid-action, in the middle of pounding beans for breakfast or sweeping the yard, held their heads still, listened, and without hesitation put down the pounder or the broom in their hands, began to bark out instructions to the rest of their household. They quickly packed water, food, gathered up the smallest of their children, the ones that still suckled their breasts, and ran out to join the women as they marched along that road to Aba back then in 1929. My mother was away for some time, had traveled south with the rest of the protest against the threat of more tax. A direct tax on women implemented by the colonials after the Great Wall Street crash. Thousands of women went protesting, demanding their right to greater representation in the new system. No one expected it to turn into a 2-month war, least of all my father. They say my mother came from a long line of fighters, warrior-like women, that she could silence the village council with just a stare. That she was raised in the old ways before Mr. Kitson discovered coal instead of silver, before Lord Lugard, before the North was joined to the South, before the installation of colonial warrant chiefs and the colonial native courts, which pushed the women aside, silenced them in the new colonial system way back then when Nigeria was born in 19 14. Well, at least before, women like her were sent away to missionary schools, to St. Anne's to the west, Holy Rosary to the east, to Queen's College and many more, where they learned to speak the King's English, primly pour English tea, and don their white gloves to pose prettily for old studio black and whites. They say my mother looked her shooter straight in the eyes, dared him, before falling face down to the ground, and that her blood flowed out onto the soil, a deep red like palm oil, winding and parting like the Niger on the grainy ground. They say that the women gathered round, saw the blood, heard the sky above give out a thunderous cry, screamed, then turned in response to the cry from their God in the sky to set alight the courts, the buildings, and the shops of their colonial masters. And why do I start this story with my mother? Because through understanding our women, even a little, you will understand what nestled at the core of my dear, sweet Rose.
I love that your grandmother was the inspiration for this story. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So I was sitting down one day, and this story starts with Obi talking about his mother, and obviously from the passage, she passed away in the Abbey of Women's riots. And I was doing writing a play about the Abbey of Women's riots at the time, and we were just enjoying our Saturday afternoon. And I looked up, and there was a film on the television, and it was an old black and white. And I turned around to my grandmother, and I said to her, "Oh, is anybody from your village fighting the war?" And to my great surprise, because I was expecting her to say no, she said yes. And that's where we started talking, and I found out more about the involvement of African soldiers in the Second World War.
Yeah, and it's it's such an important part of history, and one that we're not usually that's not usually spoken about in the narrative around World War II. And so I read that you did a lot of research in the archives at the Imperial War Museum.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, could you tell us a bit about kind of how you went about that?
Yeah. So it was. So I did a lot of research, and it wasn't just the Imperial War Museum. So I spoke to a lot of elders or in my family about what happened during the Second World War and what information they could give me, what it was like growing up during that period. And there was a few men that I interviewed that I got a few of the characteristics for Obi. But also in the Imperial War Museum, there was a lot of voice recordings of the old soldiers talking about their experience. So it's just going through those recordings, reading some of the information, and during that process, that's when Obi appeared and came out of that collection of information, and he just came to life.
Yeah, so he was kind of an amalgamation of different soldiers' stories.
Yeah, it was reading all that, reading all about their stories. It was talking to elders as well, and what they were like. So it was an amalgamation of all of that, and he came out of that, and he to tell the story of what it was like to fight in the Second World War, to come from Nigeria because they came from Nigeria and went all the way out to Burma to fight.
And when you were approaching it as a story, did you have the framework of what you wanted the story to be, the story that you wanted to tell, and then your characters were developed through that, or did you create your soldier? Did you create your character first, and then see where the story took you? How much planning was done in terms of the infrastructure of the story before you kind of put pen to paper?
Well, you always have a kind of rough sketch of where you think your story is going to go, but I always believe in letting my characters tend to lead me where they want the story to go.
Yeah.
So I have my idea, but when you start writing something, and when the character comes out, they actually lead you to what they want to say and where they want to go with the story.
I think that actually comes out in your writing as well, because I think it feels very kind of, there's a kind of a freshness and a kind of a spontaneity within the structure of it, which I think is often led by, writers who let their characters tell their story for them to an extent.
Yeah, I think it's important because for me, I thought it was an important story to tell, not just because you don't really read that much about them, but also it's also about the next generation, and I have the next generation that I want to pass that story on to as well.
Yeah.
So, my grandmother told me about the soldiers that left her village and went to fight out on their way to Burma, went to fight in Burma. But I thought it was also important that I'm kind of like the middleman. So she told me, and if I don't tell the story for the next generation, then it stops with me. So I thought it was important that I pass that on.
There's a real sense of that feels like a real sense of responsibility as well, I imagine, as the writer.
Yeah, well, not as a writer, but just as a human being. I think it's important that for me, it's important that that my work, particularly for this story, that what I'm doing doesn't just stop with me.
Yeah.
As I said, if my grandmother passed her story on to me, and it just stops with me, and I don't tell it, it dies.
Yeah.
So it's important for me to tell the next, generation, my children, that story, so that they have a sense of what their heritage, the involvement of their heritage in the Second World War. Particularly if you're going to school. Well, I went to school over here, and I wasn't told anything about the involvement of African soldiers in the Second World War.
Yeah.
So if I can leave something behind that tells them that, I think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I understand that when you were writing your first novel, The Book of Echoes, that there was something like 20 years between your first draft and then kind of it getting to publication. And then, so I'm guessing your timeline for Rose in the Burma Sky was quite different to that. So how did the two experiences compare? Because presumably you had a deadline for Rose in the Burma Sky because you had a 2-book deal.
Yes, I did. So with the Book of Echo, it took me 6 months to write and 20 years of rewriting and trying to get it published, and it was a long journey. But with Rose in the Burma Sky, it actually took me, about a year and a half to write and a year and a half of a publication journey.
Yeah.
So it took longer to write, but it was a shorter publication journey.
And how are you writing the next book at the moment?
Yes, I am. I'm writing my 3rd book. Don't ask me what it's about.
No.
I haven't figured it out yet.
We wouldn't ask you for your secrets, but I just wondered, it's your approach to writing your 3rd novel. Are you feeling like you're quite a seasoned writer now, and you have a process, or you have a way of writing every day, or does every book feel like a new experience?
Well, as I'm on my third book, the first two were a totally different experience, and this one is a totally different experience. So, for me, it's a bit. I know people say this all the time, but for me, it's a bit like having children, isn't it? Every child is different, and you treat it differently, and it requires different things to develop it.
And so, do you have? How would you like measure having a successful writing day, for example? Do you have like a word count, or do you have a certain amount of time that you sit down in front of your laptop, or what does like an average writing day look like for you?
Well, it depends on what stage of the writing that you're in.
Yeah. Or
for me, it depends on what stage of writing that I'm in. If I'm at the beginning of the writing, I do word counts, but it's a loose word count.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that higher. Some people, you talk to them and they say, "Oh, I've got 2,000, 3,000 word counts per day," but I'm a lot of a slower writer, because for me it's the process of getting to understand the characters that I'm writing, understanding who they are and what their lives are like, and that is a much more involved process than just writing words, if you understand.
That's probably a more economical way of doing it in the long term, though, because I find that if I'm writing to like a word count, I'm feeling very proud of myself that I've written 4,000 words or whatever it might be. It might be that only kind of 500 of them actually make it into the next draft. So yes, I think there's an economy of scale with these different things, isn't there, about how you approach them?
I think everybody's different, isn't it? If writing 2,000, 3,000 words a day works for you, then that's great. But it wouldn't work for me.
Yeah.
And do you find when with writing historical fiction as well, do you find that you kind of do you find yourself stopping to kind of look things up during the writing, or are you able to make a note, check this fact, or?
Yes and no, because I do a lot of work beforehand before I start writing. So the characters are already formed. So I do a lot of work before I get into that stage. So in terms of I might stop and check that some information, but I think I do more of the checking in the second or third or fourth draft.
And when you're in the throes of writing and you get to that point where you sit down and then you go, oh God, just don't really feel like it's going anywhere, or you're just getting yourself in a bit of muddle or just completely stuck, do you have any kind of tricks, or are there any kind of things that you do to get your imagination going again, or get the kind of creative like juices flowing again?
No, but I have noticed that when I get to that stage, if I just keep writing, eventually something comes out.
Yeah. So kind of write yourself out of a block almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think that's a real skill in itself to be able to do that as well, to kind of keep writing until...
Not just throw your toys out the pram.
Yeah, totally. I was just thinking, like running, just kind of just kind of doing it, like walking becomes faster, until then you're back into having a run instead of just thinking, I'll just watch the telly.
No, I find that process works for me, because otherwise it's because in that process of just writing, you discover other things.
Yeah,
it's like you're asking your character questions. It's a bit like being a little bit of a detective in a way. And it's only when you hit on a particular question you realise actually there's more in there, and then you can explore it a bit more. But if you just throw things, or if you just come away and don't do anything, you kind of lose it.
Yeah.
And did you always want to write?
I've always written. Mainly because I started writing because I've always had to write.
Mm.
I've always written poetry, short stories, things like that, and I find writing for me a form of therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a cheap form of therapy in a way. So yeah, so I've always had to write.
And with that as well, are you a keen reader as well? And if so,
Yes.
what kind of
Yes.
things do you read?
So yes, I do read along the lines of the work that I do.
Yeah.
But I would say that's about 60% of what I read. But there is a 40% of a cross genre that I do. So I will read. I think, what did I read the other day? Was it Millie Johnson? Which is quite good. So I do read across genre. I read all sorts of books, but majority is I would say literary fiction.
Mm.
Just thinking about your writing process again, are you somebody that kind of shares your work in a writing group during the process, or is your kind of editor the first person that sees it?
Well, the yes and no. Again, there's no set script for me, unfortunately. I do belong to a writing group, and I have shared my work in the writing group. But it depends on how I feel about a particular piece of work, and whether I feel that by sharing it in the writing group, whether I could get some good feedback to develop it, or whether I need what I feel that particular piece of work needs. So if it needs a writing group feedback, then I will share it in the writing group feed setting.
Yeah.
But if I feel that it needs more an editor's eye over it, then I will share it with an editor and get more feedback from there. Or if I feel that it just needs my family's feedback, then I'll share it with them.
That's almost the bravest of all, I think, isn't it? Showing it to your nearest and dearest.
Definitely.
And on that, I'm just thinking, because a lot of our writers will be very new to the process, and so, what if you could go back to yourself when you started, like on your journey as a writer? Are there any kind of hints or tips that you give yourself? Is there any kind of things you'd say, don't worry about that, or whatever? So what would you say to your kind of younger writing self?
Oh gosh, it's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's so much advice that you hear out there, and I think it's all tailored to individuals, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what will work for one person might not necessarily work for another. And what will work for you at one stage might not work for you at another stage. So
I guess, is there anything you do differently looking back? Is there anything you do differently, or do you just think that the process in itself is a learning experience?
I think the process is a learning experience, and every book for me has been a learning experience, and I feel that I'm still learning as well.
Yeah.
I don't think that I feel that I've quite arrived. Maybe I will never feel like I've quite arrived, but yeah, it's a growth process for me, continual improvement. What would I go back and tell my younger self that was trying to get that work published? That I think initially when I think about that, it took a 20-year journey. When I first got the Book of Echoes, I thought, oh gosh, if only I had done it sooner and quicker. But now that looking back, I'm thinking that because it took me so long, I was working in engineering at the time. And now that I look back, I also appreciate that engineering experience, because all of those experiences go back into the writing as well. So nothing is wasted.
And I suppose, to go back to kind of the analogy about different books being like different children, it's also we're kind of different parents at different part of the parenting journey. So I guess you're a different writer at different stages as well.
Yes. And you're the way that you view your writing and the writing world changes according to the stage that you're at as well. Because when you're first trying to get your book published, you view it in a different way.
Yeah.
So after you've got after you've had your first book published and you come onto the other end, your view shifts slightly, I think. And
on that, I know that you said that we won't really talk about the kind of content of book 3. But are you working to deadline? Do you have a point where you've got to have it in with your publisher for publication?
Well, the first book, I didn't work to deadline because I didn't have a publisher.
Yeah.
The second book, I had a deadline, but I wasn't really writing to a deadline because I think the book drove me to finish it quicker than the deadline required. And this book, I'm not writing to a deadline. So I suppose generally, from the experience of the 3 books, I don't really write to a deadline. I think there are some writers that do write to deadlines. I think they're more productive. So that's the positive of writing to a deadline, I think.
But then you've got the impetus of your story wanting to come out of you is the thing that's driving the process forward. Yeah. And I think that's that's a brilliant thing in of itself.
Yeah, there's pros and cons to everything, isn't there?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that almost feels like a brilliant place to kind of to leave it, of like there are pros and cons to all of these processes, and we really appreciate you sharing both of those that you've experienced with us and our listeners as well. So for anybody who's listening, if they want to find out more about you and your books, are you on any of like Insta or any of the other socials? And if so, are you able to share your handles?
So on the Instagram, I think it's at Rosanna Amaka, or is it just Rosanna Amaka? And on, I think it's not Twitter, it's X now. It's Rosanna Amaka as well. So if you just go on any of those and type in Rosanna Amaka, you should find me.
Brilliant. Well, it has been such a joy to speak to you, and we're very much looking forward to finding out about novel 3 as well. So we'll keep our listeners posted about that. And yes, thank you again for being so generous with sharing your experience and for reading your novel with us.
And thank you for inviting me on to your podcast. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Forthright podcast.
Check out our website, forthright.uk, for further writing resources and tips.
We hope you're enjoying listening along to all the chats that we have with our fabulous author guests. If you are enjoying it, please, please, please give us 5 stars and leave a review to help us reach more people.
And if you're not enjoying them, then please just don't bother. Thanks very much.
Bye.